Welcome to another deep dive where, as always, we go beyond the surface and try to get to the core of what makes people do the seemingly impossible.
Absolutely.
And today we're doing that by exploring the philosophy and experiences of David Goggins. And for this, we're drawing from his powerful book, Can't Hurt Me.
Yeah. Can't Hurt Me, Master Your Mind, and Defy the Odds. It's a pretty intense read. And what we're going to do today is really give you like a shortcut to the core of Goggins' approach. We're going to look at his extraordinary life. I mean, the guy has been through, a really challenging childhood, academic struggles, weight issues, and then this relentless pursuit of things like, Navy SEAL training, ultra marathons, all this crazy stuff. And we're going to try to pull out those insights that can be valuable to you, no matter where you are in life right now, what your ambitions are. So our real mission here is to figure out like the why behind his just incredible drive.
Yeah.
And then even more importantly, how can you learn from that?
Yeah, how do we take that and apply it to our own lives? So strap in.
It's going to be a ride.
Yeah. One of the things that Goggins really punches you in the face with right out of the gate is this idea that motivation is crap. And he's not subtle about it.
No, he's not.
Right.
He's not a subtle guy in general, I think. But yeah, I mean, he really sees motivation as this fleeting thing, like a spark.
Right.
It comes and goes.
Yeah.
And it depends on so many, things outside of your control. It's that feeling you get after watching a good YouTube video or, someone gives a good pep talk and, you feel really amped up, does it really create any lasting change? And Goggins is all about what happens when that initial, burst of motivation wears off.
Yeah. So instead of waiting for this magical feeling or that YouTube video to give you, the push, he really emphasizes this idea of taking ownership of your life.
Right.
Even if you feel like you've been dealt a really, really bad hand, he's saying that you have the power to start to fix it. Right.
And his own life is like exhibit A of this.
Yeah.
He didn't wait for some lucky break or some external thing to come and save him.
Right.
He went out and sought out discomfort, put himself in really challenging situations, and he used that struggle as like the engine of his transformation.
Yeah.
And that's where this whole concept of, going to war with yourself comes in. That constant battle against your own weaknesses and your own, ingrained limitations. It's like this internal struggle that he embraces.
Yeah. And I think to really understand where this intensity comes from, we have to look back at his past.
Yeah.
The book, he paints this really vivid picture of Williamsville, Buffalo in 1981. It's, classic American suburb.
On the surface.
Yeah, yeah. And then, he contrasts that with what he calls the hell that he was living through at that time on Paradise Road.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because, it really is a stark contrast between this outward appearance, right? Like the image of this nice little suburb,
Right.
and then the reality of what was happening.
Yeah.
And, for example, Skateland, right? His family's roller rink. If you just saw it from the outside, you might think, oh, that's kind of, a fun local business.
Mm-hmm.
But behind closed doors, his father, Toughness, was running a very controlling, very tight ship. He was exploiting Goggins' mom financially, and that whole environment was just filled with tension and abuse. And that really marked his childhood.
Yeah, some of the stories from his early childhood are really chilling. I mean, he talks about having a loaded gun under his pillow at 6 years old.
Yeah. It's just...
he witnessed his mother's abuse, and the police essentially just kind of writing it off. I mean, it really kind of throws you into the reality of what he was dealing with.
Yeah, he had this lack of safety, this lack of support from really anyone. And, that exposure to violence, the helplessness, it shaped the way he saw the world. And I think, it also created this deep need to be in control of his own life. And, even the move to Indiana, which, you'd think would be a good thing, right? Moving away from all that.
Fresh start.
Yeah, with his mom and his brother. But even that, still carried the weight of that trauma.
Yeah. And you also have these figures in his life that really make an impact on him, both positive and negative.
Right.
You've got Ms. D, the teacher, who really just didn't seem to get him.
Yeah.
And kind of, I think, compounded his learning difficulties.
Yeah, made it worse.
Yeah. And then his sister, Catherine,
Right.
who had high expectations, but she actually understood that, people learn in different ways.
Right. She met him where he was at.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, right? Because those early interactions, they can have such a huge impact.
Yeah.
A huge impact.
On someone's trajectory. And it shows you how how critical, belief in someone's potential coupled with that understanding of their individual needs can be.
Yeah.
'Cause look what happened with Catherine, She unlocked something incredible.
All right.
But on the other hand, you have Mrs. D and her frustration, most likely just reinforced his own negative self-image.
Right, yeah. So how does he start to actually dismantle all of this?
Right.
One of the tools that he introduces early on is this thing called the accountability mirror and this practice of journaling.
Yeah.
What's the idea here?
So this is where Goggins really demands radical honesty.
Okay.
Like, it's not about, just listing out your goals or something. It's about really confronting your excuses. Like, really acknowledging all those very good reasons why you shouldn't amount to a damn thing, as he puts it.
Right.
It's like stripping away all the BS, all the self-deception.
And seeing yourself for who you really are.
Yeah.
However uncomfortable that might be.
Okay, so that's the mirror. Where does the journaling come in?
Right. So the exercise is to write all of that down. Like really physically put it down on paper or on a screen, whatever.
Okay.
Every insecurity, every past failure, all the reasons you tell yourself, I can't do this, I can't achieve that.
Yeah.
And when you put it down like that, when you make it, tangible.
Yeah.
He talks about giving your pain shape. You're really acknowledging the power it has over you.
Right.
And then from there, you can start to change the script.
Okay.
So, it's not about wallowing in self-pity, but using those weaknesses as like the raw material for change.
Okay, so we're not just going to look at ourselves in the mirror and be like, man, you suck.
No.
We're going to look at ourselves in the mirror and be like, man, you suck. Here's how we're going to fix that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And he even talks about, taking it a step further and sharing your bad hand with the world.
Yeah.
Putting it out there, maybe with hashtags or at least, acknowledging it to yourself very clearly.
Right.
So it's about moving from this place of denial into this place of ownership.
Okay, so even after he, escapes the kind of immediate trauma of his childhood, he's still facing these major challenges.
Oh yeah. Life doesn't stop throwing punches.
Yeah.
He gets a little bit of hope.
Yeah.
This guy, Wilmoth Irving,
right.
seems like, a real chance for his mom at a new beginning.
Yeah.
But then, tragedy strikes. This guy dies suddenly. And that really, really impacts Goggins and his mom as well, of course.
Yeah.
But for Goggins, it kind of reignites those feelings of anger and injustice. Mm-hmm. And it reinforces this idea that the world is a very unpredictable and often cruel place.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, he's still struggling in school.
Right.
He gets to Cathedral High School and he feels like he doesn't belong. He feels like an imposter.
Right. Yeah.
He even calls himself a fraud. It's like it's one step forward and then two steps back.
Right. Yeah. And that whole transfer to North Central.
Right, yeah.
This totally different environment.
Yeah. A majority black neighborhood. And again, he's the outsider.
Right.
He's navigating all these new social dynamics and doesn't really feel like he belongs anywhere.
Yeah.
And even, when he goes back to Brazil, Indiana, things have improved a little bit on the surface.
Yeah.
But that underlying insecurity is still there.
Right.
Even something as simple as like the basketball tryouts.
Yeah.
And this clash over trash talking etiquette,
Yeah.
It shows you that he's still struggling to find his place.
Yeah.
And then of course you have that awful racial slur incident.
Yeah.
It's a really uncomfortable moment, but it's a stark reminder of the prejudice that he faced.
Yeah.
And initially his reaction is anger. He wants to fight back. But as he gets older and matures and gains perspective,
right.
his understanding of those kinds of incidents evolves.
Yeah. And so externally he's dealing with all of this stuff, but then internally he's also sabotaging himself.
Right.
He admits to hiding in high school, gaming himself, as he puts it, by cheating.
Yeah.
What's the significance of this period?
I think this is a really crucial point in his self-awareness journey.
Yeah.
Because he's realizing that he's not fooling anyone but himself.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
He's taking the easy way out.
Right.
He's avoiding the hard work that actually leads to growth.
Right.
It's all short-term gratification that's actually hindering his long-term development.
Right. And then that pivotal letter arrives from school.
Oh, yeah.
Laying out his failing grades, the poor attendance.
Yeah.
And, he's living on his own at this point. So it's like this really harsh wake-up call.
Yeah. No one to shield him from it.
Yeah.
He has to face the music.
Yeah.
And he has this solo intervention, as he calls it,
Yeah.
in the shower.
Yeah.
It's a really powerful image
Yeah.
of him, alone with himself, finally being honest, finally holding himself accountable
Yeah.
for the choices he's made.
Right.
And it's a turning point. He's acknowledging this destructive pattern
Yeah.
and deciding to break free from it.
Right. And that's when we see this really radical shift, right? He starts intentionally seeking out discomfort. He talks about brainwashing himself into craving it,
Yeah.
running in terrible weather, making things harder for himself on purpose. Why this extreme approach?
I think it's like mental stress inoculation. By constantly exposing himself to these minor discomforts,
Right.
he's building resilience. He's training his mind to not shy away from difficulty.
Right.
It's about redefining what his comfort zone is
Okay.
and expanding his capacity to endure.
Right.
It's like he's pushing the boundaries of what he thinks he can handle.
Right. And the accountability mirror.
It becomes this constant reminder, right?
Yeah. It's not just about looking at his reflection. It's about facing those promises he made to himself.
Right.
It's a daily confrontation
Yeah.
with his goals and a check on whether his actions are matching his aspirations.
Okay.
It's like you can't just conveniently forget your commitments
Right.
when that mirror is staring you in the face.
And I think nothing illustrates this transformation more powerfully than when his approach to learning. I mean, to go from, I think it was a 4th grade reading level to that of a high school senior in just 6 months, just through sheer willpower. That's incredible.
It's amazing.
How did he do that?
It's the intensity. It's the sheer intensity of his effort.
Right.
The hours of transcription, the memorization. For every hour he spent with a tutor, he would spend 6 hours studying on his own.
Wow.
It's incredible, and he basically developed an obsession for learning.
Right.
Which is the complete opposite of how he was before. Right.
Right. And it wasn't just about catching up. It was about fundamentally changing his relationship.
Right.
With knowledge and with effort.
Right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just internal changes. He starts to see those people who made him uncomfortable in the past.
Right.
In a different light.
Yeah.
Like he starts to recognize their own insecurities. And I think that shows a lot of growth, emotional growth.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, he's moving from a place of blame.
Right.
And resentment to a place of empathy.
Right.
And understanding. He starts to see that, their negativity, it's not really about him.
Right.
It's a reflection of their own stuff.
Right. But his journey is, far from just the intellectual. I mean, after his time in the Air Force, he gains a lot of weight.
Right.
And he has this moment of really intense self-disgust. He talks about feeling like a pussy, even though he was, a big guy.
Right.
What causes this next big transformation in his life?
I think it's that internal conflict, that disconnect between how he saw himself and how he actually was,
right.
Physically. And I think, he felt like he had let himself down. He wasn't living up to his own standards
right.
of toughness. And then he sees this show on TV, Navy SEALs Hell Week.
Yeah.
And most people would watch that and be horrified, right? But he's drawn to it.
Yeah.
He's almost jealous of the suffering. And I think that really speaks volumes about how his mindset is shifting at this point. Because now he's associating that kind of hardship with growth and transformation.
Yeah.
He sees suffering not as something to be avoided, but as something that makes you stronger.
Right.
It's like a crucible.
Right.
That forges you into something exceptional.
So this leads him to connect with this petty officer, Stephen Shaljo.
Right.
And he sets out on this mission to lose 106 pounds in less than 3 months, while also preparing to retake the ASVAB. I mean, that sounds insane.
It does sound crazy, right? But again, this is Goggins.
Yeah.
He's all about these audacious goals. And the ASVAB thing, it's interesting because it's a recurring theme for him. It's this academic hurdle he has to keep overcoming.
Right.
And it symbolizes the fact that, he needs to address both his physical and his intellectual development.
Right.
To achieve what he wants to achieve.
Yeah. And his early attempts at running, I mean, barely making it 400 yards.
Oh, yeah.
That shows you just how far he had let himself go physically.
Right. He's a long way from being an ultra athlete at this point.
Yeah.
But he doesn't give up. He finds inspiration in Rocky of all things.
Yeah.
You know, that classic underdog story. And that kind of reignites his determination,
Right.
you know, to push forward, even though it seems impossible.
So then we see this relentless transformation. This training regimen that he puts himself through.
Oh, yeah. Intense.
Just intense.
Multifaceted everything.
Then losing all this weight.
Yeah. Rapid weight loss.
Yeah. Pushing himself to double the workouts that they expect for BDS.
BDS first phase, which is notoriously difficult.
Yeah.
But he wasn't just trying to survive.
Yeah.
He was trying to excel.
Right.
You know, he was going for mastery.
Yeah.
And that really becomes his signature, right?
Yeah.
That all or nothing mentality.
And then he gets his ASWAB score.
Right.
And Shaljo kind of bends the rules to give it to him early. I mean, that must have been such a nerve-wracking moment for him.
Oh, for sure. His whole future was riding on that score.
Right.
And, you know, you can hear the emotion in his voice when he calls his mom to tell her that he passed.
Right.
It's like, you know, after all those struggles in school, to finally overcome that hurdle,
right.
It was huge for him.
Huge. But even with this huge step forward, he then has to make another really difficult decision. He gets that ultimatum from his wife.
Right.
And he has to choose between his marriage and this lifelong dream of becoming a SEAL.
Yeah, and that's a tough one. And you can really feel the conflict that he's going through. And his reasoning is really interesting. You know, he talks about feeling like a prisoner in his own mind.
Right.
And he sees this as his only way to break free.
Right.
You know, like this is his one shot at real freedom.
So he chooses the SEALs,
Yeah.
and then comes the legendary Hell Week.
Yeah.
You know, Psycho Pete, the 130 hours straight of physical and mental torture.
Designed to break you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, how do people even survive that?
I think that's the whole point, right? It's designed to strip you down.
Right.
To your core, to see what you're really made of.
Yeah.
You know, to expose your true character.
Yeah.
And the setting, you know, the Naval Special Warfare Command Center.
Yeah.
It's like the ultimate testing ground for human endurance.
Yeah. And Psycho Pete's role in all this, just the constant, you know, mental pressure.
Oh, yeah. The threats.
Yeah, the threats.
Right.
I mean, it's all part of this plan to just push people to their absolute breaking point.
Yeah, it's controlled chaos.
Yeah.
You know, designed to assault your will to continue.
Yeah.
But within that craziness,
Yeah.
Goggins finds something really remarkable.
Okay.
He finds strength in shared suffering. You know, he meets this guy, Bill Freak Brown,
Yeah.
who has a similar background of overcoming hardship.
Yeah.
And they connect immediately.
Right.
They become these pillars of boat crew too.
Yeah.
And they refuse to give in. They're not going to let the instructors break.
Right.
And in fact, they even outperform the other boat crews
Yeah.
despite all the torment.
Yeah.
And it's a really powerful example of how camaraderie and shared determination can actually make you more resilient as an individual.
Yeah. But even Goggins, you know, with all of his seemingly superhuman drive,
Right.
has moments of vulnerability.
Of course, he's human.
Yeah.
He gets a knee injury.
Yeah.
He almost fails that paddling drill.
Yeah.
You know, and these are reminders that, you know, everyone has their limits.
Right.
Even the toughest guys.
Yeah. And I love that moment with Freak Brown in the water where Brown's like, hey, man, are you okay?
Right. He sees that Goggins is struggling.
Yeah.
But Goggins is trying to project this image of strength,
Right.
you know, even though he's hurting.
Mm-hmm.
And then he has to navigate that rope bridge,
Yeah.
you know, in that cold mud pit with this busted knee.
Yeah.
It's just sheer willpower at that point.
It's incredible.
And then finally, you know, this announcement, Hell Week secure.
Yeah.
It must have been such a wave of relief.
Yeah.
But also just, you know, exhaustion.
Yeah.
Like just knowing what they had gone through,
Right.
you know, to survive that.
Right. But the training doesn't stop.
No, it does.
He's still dealing with that knee injury.
Right.
And then he has this challenge that he didn't expect, which is the underwater knot tying.
Right. And that forces him to confront his fear of the pool,
Yeah.
which, you know, is something he's carried with him
Yeah.
for a long time.
Right.
But again, it's about pushing past those perceived limitations.
Right.
And this is where the idea of the armored mind really comes in. He starts to connect those physical calluses
Right.
on his hands, you know, from the training to this mental toughness that he's been developing.
Yeah.
And it's a choice.
Yeah.
You know, he's choosing to not be a victim
Right.
of his past,
Right.
but to use those experiences to callous his mind,
Right.
to build up that mental resilience.
Right.
You
So
know?
that's where that concept comes from.
Exactly. And he overcomes that fear of the water.
Right.
And it's a huge victory for him.
Yeah.
And he even notices that the whole attitude of his class
Right.
has changed.
Yeah.
Right after Hell Week.
Yeah.
You know, they've all been through this together.
Yeah.
And they have this shared understanding of what they're capable of.
Right.
It's a powerful thing.
It is. Goggins, he talks a lot about the importance of self-talk
Oh, yeah.
in navigating these challenges, and he's consciously using his past experiences
Right.
to fuel his present endurance.
Yeah, it's like he's drawing strength from those memories.
Yeah.
And this callousing of the mind, it becomes an ongoing discipline.
Right.
It's not a one-time thing.
Right.
It's something you have to work on constantly.
Right.
You know? And he's always looking for those boundaries, those limits.
Yeah.
And then pushing against them.
Right.
You know? And he sees physical training as this perfect way
Yeah.
to hone that mental game, to learn how to override that urge to quit
Right.
when it's the strongest.
Right. But he gets rolled back from a BUDS because of that knee injury.
Right.
That must have been just crushing for him.
Devastating.
Yeah.
And then to see, you know, the helmets of the guys who had quit
Yeah.
during Hell Week.
Yeah.
You know, it makes him reflect on his own, you know, forced departure.
Right.
And it's a moment of real disappointment
Yeah.
and uncertainty.
Yeah.
You know, but even then, there's this crucial difference.
Okay.
He didn't quit.
Right.
You know, he was forced out by injury, not because he gave up.
Right.
And I think that knowledge that he didn't quit on himself,
Right.
that gave him a foundation to come back.
So he goes on this long train ride.
Right. From San Diego to Chicago.
Yeah.
It's a soul-searching journey.
Yeah.
You know, he's debating with himself, like, do I really want to be a SEAL? Are there other paths?
Right.
You know, and then he has this moment in the train bathroom
Yeah.
with the accountability mirror.
Yeah.
And it's crucial because it cuts through all that doubt.
Right.
It forces him to be honest with himself
Right.
about what he really wants.
Right.
He can't lie to that mirror.
Yeah. And then right on top of all that, he finds out that his girlfriend Pam is pregnant.
Oh, yeah. That throws another wrench in the works.
Yeah.
You know, it's like this added layer of complexity
Yeah.
and internal conflict.
Right.
And he's forced to take this really hard look at himself.
Right.
You know, he's got a broken body. He's in debt.
Right.
His life is unstable. His relationship isn't great. It's a brutal self-assessment.
Yeah. And then he also learns from watching other people's weaknesses.
Right.
He sees this guy, Sean Dobbs, quit BUDS.
Right.
Even though, you know, Dobbs seemed pretty tough at first.
Yeah, he seemed like he had it together.
Yeah.
You know, but he quit anyway.
Yeah.
And I think what Goggins learns from that is that, you know, you can build mental toughness.
Right.
But if it's built on a shaky foundation,
Right.
it can still crumble under pressure.
Yeah.
And Goggins sees some of that same vulnerability in himself, you know, from his past.
Right. Expert speaker.